Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of your abnormal psychology class. I hope that week 1 went well and that you have an understanding about how the course will work after completing the orientation. So what I'd like to do today is just give you a brief overview of the lecture that you'll be going through this week. This is by far my absolute favorite part of the entire course. When we really delve into the history of abnormal psychology, it's very interesting, especially if you've never heard it before. It can be very dark, intriguing, horrifying in some instances when we're looking at the early practices that were used. So let's go ahead and take a look. So let's begin first of all by making sure that you understand the definition of abnormal psychology. And again, that is the branch of psychology that deals with the description, causes, and treatments of abnormal behavior patterns and anything that creates a dysfunction or inhibits our ability to function on a normal level and impacts our daily functioning becomes a psychological disorder. We're going to be looking a lot at the medical model this week, and in terms of where it started, how it originated, we take a look at ancient philosophers who contributed to the development of the medical model, and that's just the model that we use when we're looking at a biological perspective, right? We're going to be looking at the physiological symptoms, how things affect us when there is a disturbance or disorder. Here you see we have definitions of a psychologist versus a psychiatrist. So again, a psychiatrist is actually going to be someone who attends more school and ends up going through medical school, right? They can write prescriptions. Whereas your psychologist, your therapist, they're licensed to practice, and they are also licensed to treat psychological disorders, but they cannot write those prescriptions. So that is probably the biggest difference, is just the level of training that occurs between the two. Another important factor that we have to look at is the cultural basis, and we'll really be delving into this over the next couple of chapters. Whenever we're looking at abnormalities and even setting norming standards, we have to take into consideration cultures and backgrounds and practices, especially when we're studying Western medicine, right? We're here in the United States, but we're such a melting pot that we really need to look at all cultural backgrounds. Some things that we perceive as abnormal in some cultures and instances may be perfectly normal. Some of the things that you typically hear about when we think of abnormal psychology are anxiety, depression, impaired behavior to function, and inability to distinguish reality from fantasy. As I mentioned, cultural perspectives to take into consideration, right? We need to look at ethnic groups. Religious beliefs is at the top of this chart, and that's very important. And you'll see that as we're going through the ancient practices and the early ideals of abnormal psychology. There's such a fine line between the realm of spirituality and abnormal psychology, and it really does speak volumes to things that we do study as abnormal psychologists and things that we really need to take into consideration, whether we are heavy in our faith or just strictly based in our science. So one of the first things that you're going to read about is the origins of the medical model. And here we're going to look at early things, just practices, physiologically, ideals that were believed by philosophers that took into consideration bodily fluids and the way they thought that anatomically we functioned and that our systems worked together. The next thing that you're going to be looking into is the demonological model. And again, this really tests that fine line between religion, spirituality, and science. And this is probably one of the darker areas that we explore, especially because of the practices. The beliefs that were held and how they could cure people is what becomes very interesting. Now, there are some things that are still part of the church that are practiced, again, if we're talking about exorcisms, in comparison to trepanation and using certain practices to cure people of ill spirits or ill will that they believed existed. This also looks at the burning of witches at the stake, right? And so we have to consider, for example, did somebody suffer from schizophrenia, or were they truly possessed by spirits, as many people believed and or still believe in certain practices today as well. So I really want you to pay attention to this section and really think about what this means as a therapist or scientist, and what that means if you are someone who has a strong faith base as well. Some of the medieval practices, again, date back to the Roman Catholic Church, to the early adoptions of Christianity from, explorers coming over, the Church of England coming over and treating as well. And so there was a lot of unknowns at this time. And so I think because of that, the thing that was most well known, spirituality and beliefs at that time, took precedence. One of the methods that they used for witches was the water flow test, and you'll see a video about that this week as well. And again, I really want you to stop and think about the practices that were employed and the damage that it caused, knowing what we know now about certain disorders, or if indeed there could have been some validity to what was going on. We're going to take a really close look at madhouses and asylums. I have a great video for you to watch and do an assignment with this week. And more importantly here as well, we're going to be looking at the ethics and the treatment of patients. And again, some of the things that we see in this video are just very unpleasant, so just keep that in mind. You have a great week. Again, if you have any questions as you're reading, or you just want to get into discussion, jump on our discussion board for the class, or feel free to send me a pronto or email with any questions. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.